Good afternoon. Welcome to our Douglas County District Attorney Candidate Forum. My name is Ursula Miner, and I'm Lawrence Branch NAACP President. I want to give a special thank you to the League of Women Voters of Lawrence and Douglas County for partnering with the NAACP and hosting these forums. Because our organizations are nonpartisan, we cannot endorse candidates. Our political activities are focused on voter registration, voter education, and most importantly, voter turnout at the polls. We appreciate the support of the Lawrence Public Library. Let's review this afternoon's format for our candidates and the audience. The questions I will ask were developed by members of the NAACP and League of Women Voters. Both candidates received the questions in advance. There will be no additional questions from the audience. Instead, we have asked that the candidates stay after the formal question and answer period so that we can visit with them. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question. Our timekeeper, Sarah Miner, will let each candidate know when there are 15 seconds left to respond, and then when time is up. We respectfully ask the candidates to stay within the time allotted for each question. Our candidates for district attorney are Tacoma Loomis, who is the Democratic candidate, and Mike Warner, who is the Republican candidate. Mr. Loomis was randomly selected to become the first question. So let's begin. Remember, you have 2 minutes for each question. We'll start with question number 1. Given your knowledge of the current district attorney's office, what do you see as necessary changes? We'll begin with Dakota.
Thank you, Ursula. I think the overarching goal of anyone who comes into the district attorney's office in 2025 is to restore trust to that office for the general public. As I think everyone in this room is aware, we've had 4 years of rocky service at best, with public headlines that have, I think, undercut the trust in the district attorney's office time and again. And so anyone going to that office as district attorney, I think the focus there should be on restoring trust to that office. And I think you can do that in 3 ways. One is you need to rebuild the relationships that have been harmed over the past 4 years, be that with law enforcement, the courts, defense attorneys, our community partners like DECA, like Bert Nash, the folks who provide services day in and day out, both to survivors of crime and the folks who come in as defendants. And so restoring those relationships that have been greatly damaged over the last 4 years should be a top priority of any incoming district attorney. Additionally, the office needs to recruit, retain, train highly ethical, highly professional prosecutors who can do the job that the community is asking them to do, to hold folks accountable, to identify people who need assistance, be it mental health treatment or substance abuse services, and to really do the job day in, day out. That's the backbone of the DA's office, which is to prosecute cases. Finally, I think all that needs to be done with restoring respect and dignity to how the office treats everyone it comes into contact with, from judges to people charged with crimes and victims of crime. So those 3 things, I think, are the key to restoring trust in that office and getting it back on the stable footing.
Thank you. Mike?
Did you say my name? Okay.
Yes.
I think initially the very first thing that's important to do is
Just press the button.
turn on your mic. Do I get a do-over? Okay, thank you. More seriously, the first thing that needs to be done is to establish in that office professional prosecutorial leadership. That is something we have not had in that office. Obviously, it's very difficult in 2 minutes to talk about how you would exactly do that. I would agree with Mr. Loomis that communication channels need to be reopened and maintained with all actors in the justice system. That includes judges, police departments, probation, the clerk's office, the defense bar, the PD's office. I've been in offices before, and I've been in offices that were dysfunctional, and I've worked as a supervisor in offices that needed restructuring. I know how to do that, and if any place needs restructuring, just based on the visceral information you all have gotten from the paper and other sources of information, this is one that desperately needs it. The office culture needs to be changed. There needs to be a focus on case management, case assignments, case filings, and case appraisals. There has to be some sort of resource efficiency system put in place so that important cases, and by important I mean serious cases, sexual-based offenses, homicides, persons crimes, are given priority, and that other cases can be disposed of appropriately without wasting resources in a manner that's not productive. Basically, in terms of restructuring the office, if I can hire professional prosecutors, I will. But I'll also try to establish a chain of command in the office where there are senior prosecutors who can supervise as well lesser experienced ADAs.
Question number 2. Tell us about the felony cases you have prosecuted and the outcomes of those cases. We'll begin with Mike.
Well, I mean, if you've attended previous forums, you'd probably say this older guy, not old, older, okay, seasoned, think fine wine, stuff like that. All he talks about is experience. Well, I've got 30 years experience as a state and federal prosecutor. Have I prosecuted felony cases before? Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good at bragging about myself, but yeah, thousands, okay? At the state and federal level, I've handled every type of crime. I've handled homicides. I've handled, and I'm not necessarily an advocate of it, I was assigned to do it. No one received the death penalty, but I handled 4 death penalty cases. And I was happy I was the one doing them because I knew they were done right. In terms of my prosecutorial approach, which might be more pertinent than my work history, I don't come from the perspective that the defendants are all bad or that they're all evil. In my prosecutorial experience, I tried to evaluate each case individually based on the facts and circumstances of the case. And I believe justice ought to be individualized as opposed to formalized or perceived as all defendants are bad and need to be sentenced to the max. A lot of times when you worked with police officers and you were trying to talk about a plea agreement, they would get mad because their only scorebook would be a maximum sentence. So this guy, he could get 20 max, but you're agreeing to 12. How come you're doing that? Or you're some sort of wuss? And it's like, no, you have to be fair in the use of your discretion. And I've done that in my prosecution of felony cases.
Dakota?
Thank you. So all of my experiences in the last 10 years have been here in Douglas County as a defense attorney. And so I've got my experiences all on the defense side here in Douglas County. So my recent experience, just like my opponent, tried all level of cases from off-grid felonies, off-grid sex crimes, off-grid homicides, attempted capital murder cases. I luckily have not had the misfortune of having to represent someone in a death penalty case. There's a special a unit that does that here in Kansas. So I've not had to stand in the courtroom when that question's been asked. But my experience has all been here in Douglas County over the last 10 years in the courtroom, trying felony cases as a defense attorney. In the last year, I've had 4 jury trials here in Douglas County, and over the course of my time as a defense attorney in Douglas County, I guess I've said, domestic all the way through to off-grid. As a prosecutor, my experience is in Baldwin City and then in Shawnee County. In Baldwin City and in Quinamo, I've been the city prosecutor for the last roughly 3 years. I've tried cases in both of those locales, but those are not felony matters. Those are misdemeanor local matters. And then when I was in Shawnee County as a district attorney, I did felony, misdemeanor, domestic violence charging. So I worked day in, day out making determinations about cases, about how to handle them, whether or not to charge them when they involved intimate partner violence, intimate partner crime. And so I built as a prosecutor, years of experience knowing what types of cases needed additional attention, have a commitment to holding intimate partner crime accountable for those, because I think that's homicide prevention. So that's my experience, both here locally and then as a prosecutor.
Thank you. Question number 3. Given limited resources, what types of crimes would your prosecutorial priorities?
So Ursula, I think we're going back and forth, so I'm assuming that I'll take this, is that right?
Yes, Dakota,
Perfect.
I'm
All right.
sorry.
No, you're all good. I should have read the instructions closer. So as far as priorities for the office, in terms of types of crimes, I don't think there are any crimes that come to that office that will not get attention on a case-by-case basis, but there is a need for the office to make sure it's focused its resources, focus its most senior experienced prosecutors on certain types of crimes. Crimes of violence against people, sexual assault crimes, intimate partner crimes, crimes involving firearms. Those are the types of cases which I believe our community has told me when I go knock on doors, this is what we want the district attorney's office to focus on when we're prosecuting folks. It's not misdemeanor marijuana, it's not paraphernalia, it's not crimes where the people need treatment opposed to being held accountable. It's the crimes where someone has been harmed, be it wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, or random act of violence against someone in their house or on the street. I've seen over the last 10 years working here the need to better prosecute, better work with law enforcement on those specific cases. Oftentimes these cases are complicated. They involve needing a district attorney's office that can work hand in hand with law enforcement to investigate cases where someone's grievously injured or killed. Oftentimes there's lots of factors that you don't know about until you really dig into those cases and have a good, strong investigation. So having a relationship with law enforcement where it's respectful and professional and you can continue to build those cases from day one is really an important aspect of whoever's the next district attorney for this office, is making sure they can do that. So those are the cases that I think the vast majority of resources should be focused on: crimes that harm people, sexual crimes of violence, intimate partner crimes, and crimes involving firearms.
Mike?
Obviously, crimes against persons will assume primary responsibility. Basically, crimes that are ranked by degree of harm to people, which would include aggravated batteries, homicides, sexual-based offenses. As a subculture of that, the crimes that obviously take priority would be those that involve children or female victims. One thing I really want to do if I'm in office is to sit down very closely with both the Sheriff's Department and the LPD and ask them about their sex crimes investigation and who their sex crimes detectives are and what kind of training they have. I am concerned about the number of sex crimes that have either been misfiled, mischarged, dismissed, or acquitted. And I'm not sure if the disconnect is because of the prosecution not knowing what they're doing and/or lack of communication with the police department. One advantage with having, again, we're going to say older, not old, guy who's worked in the federal system is that many cases locally, I don't want to say can be offloaded, but can be prosecuted more effectively with higher penalties, particularly for recidivist offenders at the federal level. That's true for armed robberies, that's true for narcotics cases, that's also true for a lot of other cases. And if there's an opportunity, which there generally is, to improve the efficiency of your office by having task force, or if you will, bi-party relationships with federal investigators and federal prosecutors, that's something I know how to do. I also know how to construct if you will, systems management approach within an office to better handle the hierarchy of crimes that we're confronted with.
Number 4, how will you address rebuilding trust with stakeholders in the criminal justice system, including law enforcement, judges, defense attorneys, service agencies, victims, and the community. We'll begin with Mike.
Well, that's kind of like the earlier question. Obviously, you want to establish communication and communication channels. You want the office to be as accessible and transparent and responsive to the public and victims as you can. The office currently has had a kind of fortress mentality, and any questions or criticisms of that office currently have been treated as attacks, or they come from haters. I think that's what Ms. Valdez said in one of these forums. That's not the approach I want to take. I plan on having monthly meetings with law enforcement. I plan to have an open office that's communicative with not only the defense bar, but also any other agency that works with the district court. I would encourage and request the creation of regular community and law enforcement conferences. We just saw one last week with the LPD chief regarding school violence. There was also an LAO Department of Justice sponsored forum last summer that was attended. I do have contacts with ATF and FBI, and that's something I can help to implement. I would also hope to be and have people in my office be a kind of, I don't want to say ambassador, but I would certainly reach out to community leaders, schools, any service group that would want to know more about the district attorney's office and what we do, and have people understand the roles that we undertake and perhaps the limitations that we also face. All right, thank you.
Dakota?
So I'm going to return to the issue of trust. Restoring trust in the district attorney's office requires reestablishing trust with all these groups that we've just been talking about. And I spent my last 10 years working in this system and establishing the trust with those folks, with judges and law enforcement who I work with daily, with Defense Bar that I'm a member of. And so I can maybe best describe by describing what I do as the defense attorney for the Douglas County Drug Court. That drug court has a team in place that covers the spectrum of folks that the district attorney's office works with on a daily basis. There's law enforcement representation. It's run by Judge Simpson. So the court manages the entire program. There's both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And then you work with providers like Burt Nash, reentry from the jail, community corrections. And so for the last 5 years, I've been doing that work with that group of folks. As a defense attorney, I've been working with all of our community partners to make sure that my clients get the best services possible, best treatment possible, and if there's anything I can do to help them in their cases and their lives, that I've been working with those groups. I've also been a member of this community for roughly 44 years. So I've got long established ties to the community. I would use all of those connections to continue to rebuild trust in the DA's office, make sure that anyone who comes into contact with the DA's office is listened to, be that providers, law enforcement, but really at the heart of this is making sure we're listening to the victims of crime, the survivors of crime, who are the emphasis and should be the focus of this office at all times. And so making sure that there's a district attorney's office with systems set up in place to make sure they're centering the survivors of crime in our communications, rebuilding trust with our community and those folks so they know they can come to the DA's office, get services, get a just result. That would be the goal of my administration over the next 4 years.
Question 5. How will you respond to the disproportionate number of BIPOC individuals in the criminal justice system? We'll begin with Dakota.
So I go to the jail frequently to visit clients, and it is the one time in Lawrence, Kansas when you are more likely to see a large group of young black males than you are to see young white males. We have a real serious issue right now with detention of people of color, charging people of color with crimes that potentially may not be charged against other folks, and that is a systemic issue that certainly includes the district attorney's office, but so many other branches of our community as well, from schools law enforcement, courts, you name it. There are issues that come up around the treatment of people of color in our community. In the district attorney's office, we often are the last folks to get the person who comes to you. So if the foster care system has abandoned them and they end up in the criminal justice system, we end up with those folks. If the school system has, you name it. So one of the few things that you can do, or one of the things that I think you should be doing at the district attorney level, is making sure that we can remove any of those biases, any of the institutional biases that we may have as prosecutors, as attorneys. So blind reads for affidavits, making sure, when I say blind read, that makes sure that you don't know the race, the gender, the home address that might be associated with certain neighborhoods associated with certain groups of folks, so that when you're looking, at least in the first read through on a case, you're not using any of those implicit biases that are too often direct how we treat folks when they come into contact with the criminal justice system, so that at the end of that process, you're making a determination based upon the evidence before you and the facts, not some preconceived notions that you might have as an attorney. So that's a great place to start, but also we just need to, day in, day out, be working with our community partners to make sure that we're listening to them about what's going on in their communities and responding appropriately to the issues that they see each day.
Mike?
Well, I've lived in Douglas County for 35 years, and I've seen it evolve and change. I've been both a defense attorney and a prosecutor. The overwhelming majority of my work has been as a prosecutor, but I do know what it's like to defend people early in my career and later. There is no question that endemic and systemically there exists discrimination in the criminal justice system. It's a part of American culture. To some extent, it exists in education, it exists in the healthcare system, it exists when people walk around a shopping mall or in Dillard's. There's no question, and I've seen it representing people. I've seen it from the role of a prosecutor, and I have not, if you will, encouraged it. And I think that's something any prosecutor that's well-rounded, that's concerned about justice, that's not concerned about winning at all costs, is going to be cognizant of. And that's something I would not tolerate if I were a district attorney. The Lawrence Times has presented over the years kind of a compilation of information about discriminatory jailing and bond practices here in Douglas County. It's unclear what causation is, but yes, it's definitely been color-based. And I've had African-American defendants where I felt, as a defense attorney, the system was to some extent slanted. And it appalled me because when I was a defense attorney, I'd also been a prosecutor for many, many years. And it's infuriating. So I would not, as a prosecutor, impose that sort of bias into my office, and any prosecutor that did wouldn't be there very long. Two things, well, 15 seconds. 1983 actions at the federal level and hate crimes. I would ask the legislature to impose an additional aggravating circumstances enhancement for gender identity crimes.
Next, we have question 6. What are your thoughts about prosecuting juvenile crimes, and how would you work with the community providers to establish effective alternatives to incarceration? Mike?
Well, I don't want to say excited about working in the juvenile crime area, but that's an area that I would take special interest in. I've already met with Eric Vaughn, the COSTA director, and we've talked about things that could be done in the juvenile justice system to improve things. In adult court, we're primarily dealing reactively with crimes that have been committed. There is some potential in the juvenile justice system to be preventative and to be educational and to have kind of a rehabilitative perspective. Along with that, it's important for any offender to accept responsibility and understand the consequences of what he or she may have done. But there is also the opportunity to redirect. A lot of times prosecutors' offices put the most junior ADAs in the juvenile system because it's a good way to learn, get experience. I don't want to do that. And I think we have a very experienced ADA there now, and we have a very excellent judge, Judge Klepper, that's there now. So one thing I am concerned about is youth violence and accessibility to firearms, and you've certainly seen that in the paper. I would like to work with ATF and police agencies here and try to develop some type of violence intervention strategy to try to address the availability of firearms and also environmental factors that push juveniles into violent acts. The juvenile justice system also sometimes deals with a trauma-based evaluation or orientation. I'm very much in favor of that, particularly the book, The Body Keeps Score.
Thanks. So I've spent the last 4 years handling high-level juvenile offenses here in Douglas County. So level 3 and above, the best way to think about that is we're talking about lots of sex crimes, attempted murders, aggravated robberies. Those are the type of clients I see day in, day out on the juvenile side. And those are it's a relatively small proportion of the folks we see, but oftentimes we're still talking about 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. And so I've got an experience working in the system, working with the DA's office. Unfortunately, as far as juvenile prosecution goes, the DA's office has a revolving door over on the juvenile prosecution side. As Mike had mentioned, oftentimes the most junior attorneys are placed in that role, and that's been the practice the last 4 years, the DA's office. Just a few weeks ago, we lost another juvenile prosecutor, maybe the 5th or 6th I've worked with in the last 3 years. And that's got to stop to make sure these kids both have consistent treatment from the court system, so they can resolve their cases quicker, that they can be held accountable and get the services they need. And when I work with these kids in day out, what I see we wanting to do is make sure they stay in their homes, make sure their homes are getting the services they need to keep them there, and make sure that they are held accountable, but do it in a manner which is certain and swift. There are intervention programs that have been put in place since 2017. There's a whole overhaul of the juvenile justice system back in 2017. There's a lot of new changes that have really helped keep kids out of detention, keep kids in their homes. What we need to do now, the real change that we need to see now, is getting more of those resources to our community partners to help keep those kids at home, keep them out of the justice system, and avoid them coming to the adult system by getting them the services they need when they're 14, 15, and 16. So that'd be the priority of my office, is making sure they get that support and keep them out of the adult system.
Mike?
I think Mike already answered that. Sorry, Ursula.
Okay, question 7. How would you use discretion in charging decisions for violent crimes involving extenuating circumstances such as mental illness or domestic violence? We'll begin with Dakota.
So I think one of the things you learn over the course of a career in criminal justice is that each case has its own individual factors. Each case has to be taken on its own merits and has its own set of facts. And so treating cases with similar or some sort of, there's a label you put on them like mental health or domestic violence related, I think can often cloud discretion in decision making if you see it as a one-size-fits-all model. What I think works best in situations like this is making sure that law enforcement and the district attorney's office are working hand in hand to get all of the relevant information they can on a case, to investigate cases fully, find out everything they can before making charging decisions or very early on in the process, so you can take into account any and all factors that might lead to a different resolution than one that would be a standard resolution or one that would be normally meted out in a situation. Talking about domestic violence, there's been recent cases here where we know we've had folks who've been the victims of sexual assault and domestic violence who've then committed crimes. Those certainly, knowing the factors in those cases, knowing all the information possible in those cases to make a good decision is crucial, and only can do that by working with law enforcement to collect that information. The other way you collect that information, and I think the other thing that any district attorney's office who cares about making good case-by-case discretionary decisions has to do is work with the folks who are the victims and survivors of these crimes to make sure that we know exactly what they would like to see happen in this case, know what's going on in their lives before they got to our door, before they've got into the court as survivors of crime, to know what it is that they need to see in these situations. So there are oftentimes circumstances that law enforcement would know about, the DA's office would know about, unless you talk to these folks who've been survivors of crime and get their input. So again, making sure we're working with law enforcement to get all the information and listening to the victims of these crimes to make sure their wishes are respected.
Mike?
First of all, there would be obvious recognition that such cases exist, a prosecutorial recognition that they exist. And I agree with Mr. Loomis, those types of cases need to be fully investigated and they need to be adequately charged. I would go one step further and say in these types of cases, it's really incumbent on prosecutors and defense attorneys, believe it or not, to work together. Ordinarily, you see these types of cases, or any type of criminal case, as being an adversarial situation where, you know, one side said, no, it's a crime, it's the serious crime. The other side says, no, it's less serious because of extenuating circumstances. If there's communication between the defense side and the prosecution side, particularly in these, what I would call them, and it's a bad term, tricky cases, where you may have a stand your ground type concept, domestic violence, or some type of mental illness, it's very important to make sure, yes, and I agree, all the facts are on the table. And it's incumbent on a prosecutor to make sure all the facts are known. You don't play hide the ball. You make sure that the judge can decide a case, or the jury, if they hear it, on all the facts, good, bad, or indifferent. In my office, we wouldn't stand in the way of defense attorneys filing motions, defense attorneys coming and trying to communicate, look, this is a situation I think you need to consider or investigate more fully. I've been a defense attorney in those types of cases. Like Mr. Loomis, I've handled off-grid cases, and they kept me up at night. He used to be commended on doing this for 10 years. But I want to see a more bipartisan approach when it comes to prosecutors and defense attorneys working on cases, and particularly cases like this.
Number 8, the Douglas County Court has created a number of alternatives to incarceration. Which ones would you retain and what others might you initiate? We'll begin with Mike.
Well, I'll make a joke here, and I apologize, but I don't have enough money to buy all the swag that Mr. Loomis has back there. I wish I had some cool buttons. All I have are handouts. And I have a handout that is called My Specific Policy Proposals. I think alternative dispositions are a great exit ramp for certain types of crimes and defendants that qualify. They should be used in circumstances that have clear conditions attached, and they shouldn't be used as a way to avoid going to court or getting rid of a difficult case. I'm all in favor of the drug court. I think it's great, and the mental health court. And if you read my handout, and I'm not going to read it to you, but I would like to extend the types of programs we currently have and have a veterans court, which currently exists in other places, Wyandotte County and Johnson County, where you can get perhaps treatment for veterans who alleged acts have stemmed perhaps from their service to our country. I have no issue with extending diversion to individuals that have clear need of treatment, mental health treatment, or have status offense problems such as homelessness. I would extend for the latter the condition, if we could, of community service and some work element as opposed to a free ride and a clean record. One other thing that's interesting, most district court prosecutors' offices handle care and treatment cases. It's a public service. This office currently doesn't do that, and you, the taxpayer, pays a Mass Street law firm to do that for that office. And that I have a pet fly, I'm sorry. Uh, That is something I want to end.
Dakota?
So I have intimate experience with the specialty courts here in Douglas County. When the drug court was started back in late 2019, early 2020, I was been the defense attorney for that since its creation and inception, and I've been able to see firsthand the impact it's had on individuals' lives, their families, and our community generally. So I strongly support initiatives like drug court, like the behavioral health court. I am cautiously optimistic. There's been a lot of folks at the Douglas County level between the county and the courts who've been working diligently to start a veterans court, to get funding for a veterans court. I think that, like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic that will come to fruition. And if that did, I'd be strongly supportive of a veterans court as well, to make sure that we gave opportunities to folks who've served our country. And I've often had negative outcomes due to that service, be it mental health, substance abuse, and/or traumatic brain injuries that lead them to have contact with the criminal justice system. So, I've really seen the power of these courts to change people's lives, and I want to make sure I'm clear that the people in these courts have done all the work. I have many clients have gone to these courts and have done incredible work, and they've done the work day in, day out to make sure they stay sober or get into compliance with mental health treatment. But we need to make sure we're giving those opportunities to people so we can get them off-ramped from the criminal justice system and back into the community in a safe and effective manner. So they are in compliance with medications, they are getting treatment and not using. And so those are all things I've seen firsthand day in, day out as the drug court defense attorney. I also think that any and all of these courts need to make sure they're focused on individual treatment for individual folks doing the work in the programs, and that they're not used as a place to dump folks who they don't want to handle those cases. So identifying the appropriate folks for that, getting them all the service they need, and then letting them do the work would be how I'd treat these courts in the future.
Question 9. What would you like to say in closing? We'll begin with Dakota.
Well, Ursula, I'd first like to say thank you for hosting this, for the NAACP and the League of Women Voters, for allowing my opponent and I to address the public about our views in the district attorney's office. As far as what I'd like everyone here to know about me, I've gone over it greatly, but I think the thing I stress is that I have local, relevant, recent experience here in Douglas County as to how the district attorney's office runs, how it operates, and how our system works. And my entire reason for running is to take that experience and be able to help this community restore the relationships that are in that office, restore trust in that office, and make sure that we're keeping our community safe. I've been a defense attorney here for 10 years. I've been a prosecutor in Baldwin City. I've worked on both sides here in Douglas County and see the issues that we have. As a defense attorney, my job is to represent folks to the best of my ability and to make sure they're protected. That doesn't mean, though, as a community member or a citizen here in Douglas County, I'm not concerned about what's gone on over the last 4 years and the safety issues that keep cropping up with acquittals of folks who should have been held accountable, with dismissals on cases that should have gone forward, and generally speaking, just a general lack of commitment to keeping our communities safe. I've got a 7-year-old daughter, soon to be 8, and a 3-year-old, who I want to make sure share the same benefits I did when I was growing up here in Lawrence, who could walk downtown, could go to Silas and Maddie's and not be worried about whether or not they're safe. I'm concerned that KU, that we make sure that people who come to KU, the students feel safe and that they can report crimes if they're the victims of sexual assaults or person crimes, and that Lawrence as a whole and Douglas County, our entire community, feels as though the district attorney's office is listening to them, listening to their concerns, and putting the safety of the community first and foremost in the mind, opposed to fights with judges, fights with defense attorneys, with law enforcement, you name it. So again, I'm ready to restore trust in this office and use my relevant local and recent experience to help this community stay safe.
Mike?
Well, we both sit here and we probably, in our nice suits, and we both sound very reasonable, but there is a stark contrast between both of us, and I think it's important to point it out. Mr. Loomis has never prosecuted a felony case. He's never supervised or trained a prosecutor. When he takes office, he will have to hire prosecutors to do the job you elected him to do. And the fact of the matter is, if he becomes DA, every single prosecutor in that office will have more experience than he does. He's never worked in a DA's office before. He doesn't know how to restructure them. He doesn't know how to set up an efficient case management system. He doesn't know how to communicate with police agencies as a felony court prosecutor. His prior experience has been as a solo practitioner, where you don't typically supervise a whole lot of people. And so things would be different. I wouldn't be here if Mr. Loomis had any prosecutorial experience at the district court level. I would not be here. I don't want to be here. But I'm here because of the incumbent and the disaster that happened there, and I didn't want to see another DA elected in a primary that had no experience. Now, Mr. Loomis has a ton of money, and he's got name recognition, he's got deep ties to the Democratic Party and to the business community and the legal community, and they all really want to see him become DA. And I just wonder about conflicts of interest. What about his prior clients when they come? What about his defense attorney buddies who gave him money and suddenly come to negotiate a case? He said he's had 500 felony cases and 400 misdemeanor cases. What about prior defendants and conflicts of interest? I come with no baggage, fresh eyes, and I know this county. I've lived here. You want somebody experienced? Hire me. If you want to go on affiliation and name recognition, hire him.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to the candidates for participating in our forum today, and thanks to all of you for being engaged in the political process. Remember, the last day to register to vote is Tuesday, October 15th. Please be sure you're registered at the correct address. It's easy to check at ksvotes.org. Early voting begins Wednesday, October 16th at the Douglas County Clerk and Elections Office in the Mall Shopping Center at the corner of 23rd and Louisiana. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. And now we'd like to invite everyone to visit with the candidates. NAACP and League of Women members are also available to answer questions and voting. Thank everyone for attending. Thank you to the candidates.